Fresh off the sentencing of the University of Idaho killer Bryan Kohberger, our ABC News live anchor Kanya Whitworth sat down with the Idaho murders investigative team to discuss their unexpected plea deal and the new details that are coming out about that violent attack. Kanya is with us now in Moscow, Idaho. And Kanya, what new details did you learn from this interview?
Several, Alex. Good to be here with you. So this is the first time that anyone is hearing from Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson. He is the lead detective on this case for Idaho State Police, and he was joined by current Moscow Police Chief Anthony Dollinger, as well as lead prosecutor Bill Thompson. And Alex, we did our interview right inside here. This is the Latah County Courthouse. We were sitting in courtroom 3 for our interview. That is the courtroom where a majority of Bryan Kohberger's hearings were held when he was here in Latah County before this was moved to Boise. And look, a few things that are very important here that we heard from lead prosecutor Bill Thompson initially, that they didn't know who the target was, right? Well, what he told me today is that he personally feels that, like, for whatever reason, the target was one of the 2 women on the 3rd floor of this home. The 2 women on the 3rd floor of this home, Alex, were Kaylee and Maddie. Take a listen.
I personally feel that for whatever reason, he targeted one of the young women on the 3rd floor. And the fact that he found them together, whether that was planned, we'll never know. It's more likely than not he did not expect to encounter Xana and the others up and about, and that was unfortunate. We are fortunate that he got scared and ran and left without harming Dylan or Bethany. Dylan was so vulnerable. I mean, that young woman had an angel watching over her that night, or that early that morning.
No question.
She had an angel there.
Do you think that Maddie was the target and that he was surprised to find Kaylee?
I don't think that we can tell what room he went into first. He could have very well turned left at the top of the stairs into Kaylee's room and seen an empty room. Or, as you suggest, he could have intended on going directly to Maddie's room.
So even as we narrow this down here, Alex, there are still some looming questions here. And a reminder to our viewers that the knife sheath that was found underneath Madison Mogen, we're told by authorities, was found immediately. Also notable here that we've learned that Kaylee's injuries were far more significant than Maddie's, and she was in fact described by authorities as unrecognizable when they found her, Alex.
Wow. And that notion of motive is one of the big mysteries still with this case. But Kanya, we also learned a little bit more about the night that Kohberger was questioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is the first time that we're hearing from Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson, and he traveled to Pennsylvania with another detective from Moscow Police, Brett Payne. And when they traveled to Pennsylvania after Bryan Kohberger's arrest, they sat with him, they interviewed him, and he said that their interview was lengthy, that he was respectful, and that they talked a lot about things surrounding Washington State and his education, but that the tide really shifted when they asked him specifically about the murders here in Idaho.
And then about the 3rd time, he was more pointed, wanting to know, and we said, well, I feel like you probably know why we're here. We're detectives from Idaho, and we're here because of the case in Moscow. And as soon as we mentioned that, then he stopped, and he said, I don't want to talk anymore.
They described a few other things from that arrest as well. They told me that they watched the body-worn cameras from the officers making that arrest, and that Bryan Kohberger was in fact sorting trash, wearing gloves at the time that he sort of tried to run down the stairs, but that he was met by officers and that he was taken into custody without incident. They had been surveilling him for quite some time, and they told me that it was a bit odd that he was seen wearing gloves all over the place, in places that it wouldn't make sense, like at the DMV and at the pharmacy. And Alex, they also told me that they would surveil him at night, and that one night while he was wearing dark clothing officers surveilling him almost hit him, essentially, as he was running across the street. So again, we're learning a lot of new details. I also want to mention to you, Alex, that there's been a lot of questions here about what was Bryan Kohberger carrying, right? We know the surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen, described someone clad in black carrying something like a vacuum. And the way that Bill Thompson described it to me was about like a container. And he went like this. And he said that Dylan described the man we now know as Bryan Kohberger walking past her holding a container with both hands like this.
Wow. No, it's pretty, it's something, Kanya. But I'm curious, you know, in terms of what's next for Kohberger, do we know about the prison that he's headed to?
Yeah. In fact, we were able to get a tour of the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. That is where Bryan Kohberger is now. And what's happening now is there is an assessment process that's going on that can take between 7 and 14 days. And during that assessment process, he will essentially be secluded from the other inmates while they try to figure out what is the best place to put him for his safety and for the safety of others. And so that will take a little bit of time because there's a lot of different levels of security in that institution. At the highest level of security, Alex, those inmates are in their cell for 23 hours a day, and when they are moved in restraints. But there's several other lower levels of security as well, so we don't know exactly where he will be placed. But I also want to mention here that for Bill Thompson, what he told me, because there's been a lot of questions about this plea deal, that for him, an admission of guilt from Bryan Kohberger in the end is better than a conviction in court, because for Bill, as he says it, he will now die behind bars. Alex.
Wow. All right, Kanya Whitworth, I thank you for today, and I thank you for your coverage throughout this the entire case. Thanks.